listener production.
Hey, Tara Cassidy with you and welcome to The Briefing. A David and Goliath battle is playing out in an Australian court which could set a wide-reaching precedent for any councils taking steps to effectively criminalise homelessness.
The people had nowhere to go, and yet council was essentially saying, if you don't go, we will destroy your possessions, the only meagre possessions that they had left. Then you may be fined up to $8,000.
That chat with the discrimination lawyer who's helping the homeless fight back is coming up in the second half of this episode. First though, let's get into the headlines with Helen Smith. It's Wednesday, the 23rd of July.
Morning, Tara, and to you listening. It's a sad day for rock and roll, heavy metal fans and Black Sabbath lovers. Iconic British singer, songwriter Ozzy Osbourne has died at age 76. His family announced the devastating news this morning, saying, "It's with more sadness than mere words can convey that we have to report our beloved Ozzy Osbourne has passed away. He was with his family and surrounded by love." And they went on to ask everyone to respect their privacy now while they grieve.
Yeah, and now Ozzy is certainly one star who has had a colourful career. Outside of his music, he's become really well known for the TV show, The Osbournes, which centres around him and his family. Sharon! As well as some crazy stunts over the years, and he's certainly not known for being politically correct, Helen. At a concert once in 1982 in Iowa, he actually bit the head off a bat, which caused some backlash.
All I did was get out there and make a mistake of biting a head off a bat. And I tell you what, guys, it ain't fun when you get them rabies shots.
And he actually even went on to say in an interview later that he knows one day on his tombstone it'd say, "Here lies Ozzy Osbourne, the singer who once bit the head off a bat."
Yeah, Ozzy's life has definitely been one of rock and roll, drugs and booze. It was actually what got him booted from the band back in 1979. But it didn't stunt his success, both solo and through Black Sabbath. He went on to sell over 100 million albums.
Wow.
And he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice. First as part of the band and then just last year as a solo artist. So Ozzy's survived through his wife Sharon and his 5 kids.
Yeah, wow. And look, I don't know about you, Helen, but I think Ozzy Osbourne is just one of those artists and characters who is just absolutely iconic. He's known across generations, regardless of whether you grew up with his music or not. Like, everyone knows it, knows him, and Black Sabbath itself, it's one of those bands that just paved the way for an entire genre of music, and it has had such an enormous influence on rock and roll and heavy metal. And I think this is going to be a really somber day for many people who loved him, his antics and his music. And I think there's going to be a lot of Ozzy and Sabbath playlists that are getting a workout over coming months. And what's a bet, there's a Netflix doco on the way.
The first day of Parliament has wrapped up yesterday and it did not disappoint. There were protests, tears and even some naps. New Labor MP Ali France delivered an emotional first speech after defeating former Liberal leader Peter Dutton, telling Chamber it was an epic 7-year journey.
Winning Dixon was highly unlikely, and to some an insurmountable mountain. As a single mum with one leg, battling one of the most prolific politicians of our time, fighting for fair is in my blood.
France also brought tears to the eyes of new opposition leader Susan Lee and Treasurer Jim Chalmers as she spoke about her teenage son Henry, who lost his battle with leukemia last year.
Yeah, and Susan Lee also gave her first address to the House as the new leader of the Libs, admitting it wasn't the election the party had hoped for.
This new parliament begins after an election where, to be frank, the coalition would have preferred a different result. The composition of this House has changed, as it does in every election.
And Welcome to Country also became a hot topic yesterday. It was a topic of debate during the election campaign, but Anthony Albanese opened the 48th Parliament with exactly that, saying it's a powerful way to begin a new Parliament, which is the most diverse in its history.
This country and this Parliament is our great diversity of chapters coming together. And the Welcome to Country lets us touch the very beginning of the story, our story, the Australian story.
However, later on in the chamber, a silent protest took place by 4 members of One Nation, Party leader Pauline Hanson, Malcolm Roberts and 2 new additions, WA Senator Tyrone Whitten and New South Wales Senator Warwick Stacey. They all turned their backs during the Welcome to Country acknowledgements, Helen.
Yeah, meanwhile, there were more protests, this time on the lawns of Parliament House, by pro-Palestinian protesters calling for Israel to be sanctioned, which was echoed in the Senate by Green Senator Murray Faruqi, who held up a sign reading, "Gaza is starving, words won't feed them, sanction Israel."
As well as all of that, it was also a big day for Maverick MP Bob Katter, who seemed to be nodding off during Governor-General Sam Mostyn's address to Parliament. But, it was a very big and tiring day for him because earlier he actually refused to swear allegiance to King Charles, his heirs and successors, stating his allegiance was to the Australian people. And, Helen, he is proud of it. I saw he shared a punter's post about it on his social media page with that quote, and you can see Katter wearing some dark shades, so he thinks he's pretty cool. And look, he has his views, he stands by them, and he keeps getting re-elected for them, so he's just continuing to do his thing.
We have an executive order ordering the declassification of files relating to the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
That's a big one, huh? A lot of people are waiting for this for years, for decades.
Almost 60 years to be exact. That was Trump signing the order earlier this year, and now the administration has released more than 240,000 pages of sealed records, including those relating to Martin Luther King Jr. and the FBI's surveillance of him. King's children have publicly opposed their release, with the documents intended to be sealed for another 2 years. And they've urged the public to view them within their full historical context.
Yeah, and within the documents, there's believed to be some of the FBI's leads into who assassinated Dr. King at the time, and they focus on his anti-poverty, anti-war movements, and his children have asked people to handle the documents with care and respect, and they've reiterated that they believe that the man who was actually convicted of murdering their father, James Earl Ray, didn't act alone. Now, meanwhile, that is not the only major move involving the Trump administration overnight. Following this ongoing furor, Helen, over the Trump administration's handling of the Epstein files and the so-called existing or not existing client list, the US Department of Justice says it's now seeking to subpoena and interview Ghislaine Maxwell.
Yeah, Maxwell is Epstein's accomplice who is currently serving more than 2 decades in prison after being convicted of trafficking underage girls for the disgraced financier. Now, according to a joint statement from the DOJ and FBI, Attorney General Pam Bondi's directed them to speak with Maxwell in coming days to see whether she has any further information of evidence relating to Epstein's crimes or victims. But in the statement, it reiterated that it's doing so because Trump's called for all credible evidence to be released. And at this point, it has none that would lead to any third parties being investigated further.
Joshua Dale Brown, the 26-year-old childcare worker who's facing over 70 child abuse-related offences, could be slapped with further charges. Brown's accused of abusing 8 children while working at a Melbourne early learning centre, as well as feeding his bodily fluids to the kids in his care, leading to over 2,000 children needing to be tested for sexually transmitted diseases. Now, yesterday, Brown's lawyers fronted the Melbourne Magistrates Court, telling the court an informant said there will be more charges against Brown, while also requesting that his charge list not be released to the media.
Now, he says that's because it could prejudice the case, meaning they're concerned people won't allow the natural course of justice and that he might not be presumed innocent until proven guilty. However, the magistrate presiding over the case disagreed, saying she wasn't prepared to restrict access. And the charge list shows Brown's currently facing 73 charges, 13 relating to sexually touching a child, 3 for sexual penetration of a child under 12, nearly 30 charges of producing child abuse material, and 24 for transmitting it.
Brown is so far understood to have worked at over 20 childcare centres, and his previous places of work are being investigated. Detectives are continuing to try and piece together a full list of everywhere he's worked, the dates, times and any children that he's been in contact with, and his case will next be heard in February for a committal mention.
And Uber is continuing to fight a discrimination case led by a blind Victorian woman who claims trips with her guide dog were regularly cancelled. But the rideshare giant says it has not breached anti-discrimination laws, arguing it's not their responsibility, rather the drivers, as they are contractors, not employees. Now, this isn't the first time rideshare companies have come under fire for refusing to pick up customers. And of course, drivers can cancel rides if they feel unsafe.
Yeah, but look, I am very glad, I have to say, Helen, that they are being taken to court over this. I mean, this poor lady, she's also experiencing something I think that every second person in Australia that's ever got an Uber could say that they have a story about. I swear, when I was living on the Gold Coast, like every single Uber that I would order, we would get like 4 or 5 before we'd actually get one. And it was to the point we actually had to put in a fake end destination to get someone to pick us up, and we'd have to change it while we were in the cab ride just because people were like, oh, I don't want to go that, I want to go further. They wanted a big trip. So I'm glad that this is being tested in court. I think they need to go back to being the Uber that they were when they first launched, that everyone loved. It was cheap and reliable.
Yeah, I think everyone definitely has a story about Uber, but we want to know what you guys think, and if this has happened to you, we'll pop a question box in our broadcast channel, and we'd love to know, have you ever been refused an Uber or a rideshare service, or what was the most outrageous reason why somebody has had theirs cancelled? But that's it for today's headlines. Coming up next is your deep dive, Tara, into the council cracking down on homelessness who have actually been accused of breaching their human rights.
Pets banned, their camps destroyed, even the last memory of their dead daughter demolished. This is the experience of a group of homeless residents in Queensland's Moreton Bay region, which discrimination lawyers say breaches their human rights. Tomorrow, the residents will continue their fight in court, with the case carrying the potential to set a wide-reaching precedent for other councils across the country that are taking steps to criminalise homelessness. Sam Tracy from Basic Rights Queensland is one of the lawyers representing the residents. Sam, thanks so much for joining me on the briefing today. What's the argument that you're making for these residents in court?
The basis of the argument is a judicial review. That's not the easiest of legal terminology to explain, but in essence, it means that we disagree with the way that the laws have been applied. So we believe that the council has failed to effectively follow their legal duties, and that includes human rights as a consideration.
These councils' local laws now ban people from setting up in public parks. How do those laws stack up against legally protected human rights in Australia?
Well, the way the human rights works, specifically in Queensland under the Human Rights Act, is that any decisions that are made by a public entity, which includes local councils, needs to take into account the person's human rights. Yeah, we have concerns about many of the human rights not being taken into consideration within the decisions made by council in this regard. We also believe that even where they are able to limit some of those human rights, there's what's called a proportionality test, and we don't think that that has been effectively applied either. What we noticed at the end of last year is that Moreton Bay Council in particular started to take a little bit of a harder line approach to people experiencing homelessness. So some of the first issues that came up were in regards to pets, and we were made aware of some people that had assistance animals, particularly dogs. And being a community legal centre that advises on human rights and discrimination, and particularly disability discrimination, we found this to be something quite concerning. So we started to look into that, but it didn't take too long before Moreton Bay City Council started to ramp up beyond just issuing notices for people or threatening to issue notices for people who had animals in their homeless camps. And they quickly moved to, we didn't know at this time, but they repealed that framework, which is a person's experiencing homelessness framework that required them to take someone's individual circumstances into account. They repealed that. And so then they started issuing compliance notices that says, essentially, if you do not take your possessions off this council property, and so that flows on to leaving, then you may be fined up to $8,000. So these were some pretty scary things to be happening to people out in Moreton Bay. The people had nowhere to go, and yet council was essentially saying, if you don't go, we will destroy your possessions, the only meagre possessions that they had left. And the key events that have led to this court proceeding were in Eddie Highland Park. There was many encampments at the time, and essentially council came and destroyed all of the possessions of the people that left them there. Some of those, the Bobble Dykes, had not only their tents and possessions and other things destroyed by large machinery, they also had one of their children's ashes in an urn destroyed. So that was a deeply upsetting time for them.
Wow, that's awful. What else can you tell me about the other people that you're representing and kind of what their experience has been among all this?
That couple, the Bobble Dykes, who have some intergenerational homelessness occurring, so their adult children also were experiencing homelessness at the time. A lot of them, because they could not stay in Eddie Highland Park, moved to a bush reserve, an empty, vacant area in between kind of a road and the railway line out in Kalanga. What we found a few weeks ago is that council actually came there and they told people that they were going to remove possessions within 2 weeks. So we went out there along with our pro bono partners. So together with them, just made the decision that due to the fear and anxiety that people had out there, that their tents were going to be destroyed again, that we should request of the council to let us know if they might refrain from doing that, take a breath while people could maybe find housing and engage with housing providers. And the council either failed to respond or would not make that promise or undertaking that they wouldn't do that. So we decided to take the action. And in this case, we said we have a court date. And simultaneously, the Bobble Dykes, they had actually been offered housing, which was wonderful for them. And so we asked also in court that day if maybe just the council could promise to take this injunctive relief. So they promised not to go and destroy or remove their possessions until they could move into their social housing only 5 days later. So ultimately, Moreton Bay Council's lawyers agreed, so they consented. The Bobble Dykes were able to remain, and the rest of the 11 applicants are now protected from council compliance orders until the next court date, provided that they actually meet the previous persons experiencing homelessness framework.
And so is that the main thing you really are trying to drive home? Do you think that is the balance that needs to be struck between, say, council needing to manage public spaces and keeping areas, safe and clean for everybody, which is their arguments in terms of they're saying, there's been loud noises and fires and no toilets, etc., for why they've taken this action. Do you think if they were to go back and revert to that version of these local laws that we'd be able to balance, say, what council's trying to achieve and also maintaining the rights of these residents?
Definitely, we think the previous framework was much more able to provide the requisite support for a person experiencing homelessness. These are the most vulnerable people in our community. And I fully recognise that there can be, at times, disruption caused by people experiencing homelessness that local communities might not feel too good about. That all aside, though, the balance really ought to be struck here is whether or not we can do something to help the person experiencing homelessness or whether we're doing something to harm them, because moving them on is not going to solve the problem. As we've seen, Gold Coast Council has started to take a similar action, and they have also changed their local laws recently to make that easier for them. People will move to the council area where it might be more feasible. So we need a whole Queensland-wide approach to this. Unfortunately, that's not what we saw in communications from Moreton Bay, and instead they made some vaguely dismissive commentary about how the proceedings went. And we find that really disappointing. We want to move towards solutions for people with homelessness, and we want to help councils to achieve those.
And we've seen councils and local laws in the past that essentially were said to have criminalised homelessness. Like we've had vagrancy laws and things like that in the past, which we've moved away from. Are you concerned to see that we're seeing councils gravitate back to that kind of thinking?
Absolutely. As a human rights lawyer, I find that very troubling. We moved on from those kind of laws many years ago. and I don't want to see any further wind back of rights in Queensland. We were hoping for Anti-Discrimination Act changes to have come into effect last week that may have protected the rights of homelessness, but unfortunately the current government decided not to implement those very progressive and widely consulted changes. And so we do have a risk here of a slippery slope of the erosion of people's basic rights. Like I said before, though, I do understand the complexity of these situations. It's just that we need to start working together, correcting what is a housing issue, not a crime issue. Homelessness should not be seen or to be treated as a crime. A person literally does not have a choice.
And this next court date tomorrow, what's actually happening then compared with the full hearing in November?
So July 24 is essentially when the new 11 applicants will have their judicial review looked at in court. But this one will look again at holding council off from taking any compliance or moving anyone on from the park should continue. And we would be hoping that that should happen until November because it seems very reasonable. Council has their issues and has raised issues in regards to public interest and health and safety. And hopefully in November, we can see the court will make some decisions about not just the judicial review proceedings that I mentioned there, but also this will probably have an impact more widely on how councils adopt frameworks for homelessness.
So it might set a precedence for other councils potentially.
It may do, and we would hope that other councils in South East Queensland will be working together over the coming months so that we can move towards model frameworks that are supportive but understanding of the situation that we're in here, which is complicated, but no doubt one that we ought to deal with compassion in Brisbane here as we move towards, an important time for this state, towards the Olympics. We've seen historically treatment of homeless people in those situations to be quite disturbing. So I'd like to see that we set up some great model frameworks for how council can act and how homeless people hopefully can find the housing that they need or not be treated with a breach of their human rights if they don't.
Yeah, absolutely. Sam, thanks very much for your time today and thank you for joining me on The Briefing.
Thank you, Tara.
That was Basic Rights Queensland discrimination lawyer Sam Tracy speaking with me there. And that's it for this episode of The Briefing. If you found it interesting, don't forget to leave us a comment or a review, or you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast. I'm Tara Cassidy. See you next time.
Listener.